So that's the newest one. This new article is how the IMF debt trapped Greece and created widespread poverty. So years back, the Greeks got sort of convinced to take loans that they shouldn't have, and they put down a lot of collateral that they shouldn't have. And let's just see what happened. All right. So the Greek debt crisis stands as a stark example of how Western financial institutions and policies can trap a nation in a debt cycle and economic stagnation. Far from being a simple case of fiscal mismanagement, Greece's predicament reveals the system flaws in the Eurozone structure and the often counterproductive approaches of international lenders. So this is really highly typical in the sense that the things that they're loaning you money, usually to pay off money they've already lent you. So there's been instances where they're loaning you money to pay off your loans. I don't know any drug dealer that you'd go to where they said, yeah, it's fine. Yeah. You can just borrow more drugs from me. And then, that never worked in that. And they said, well, putting people into debt is an increasingly good way to
Chris,
control.
Can you think of any other situation in which you would agree
to
borrow money to pay off debt? To borrow more, like that, you would agree to that unless you were in a position where you only had to worry about it for 4 or 8 years, and then it was somebody else's problem.
Yeah, I don't know any functionally intelligent person that would fall for such a ruse. The Greek debt crisis began long before the 2008 financial crisis. Its debt-to-GDP ratio was steadily climbing since the 1980s. By 2009, it had reached a staggering 127% of GDP. The global recession just exposed and exacerbated the vulnerabilities that were already there. And as a Eurozone member, Greece found itself in a precarious position, and it didn't have the monetary flexibility to address the underlying problem. It should be said that a lot of countries have significant debt issues with the IMF. You have Greece, Argentina, Pakistan, Ecuador, Sri Lanka, Zambia, Kenya, Laos, Mongolia, and Venezuela, not just to name a few. But when the crisis hit, Western institutions stepped in with bailout programs, in retrospect, that appeared to be more harmful than they were actually helpful. So the International Monetary Fund, European Central Bank, and the European Commission offered loans, but with really stringent conditions. These came with austerity measures, including deep budget cuts, tax hikes, and pension reductions, trying to steal money from old people in order to get a loan from a World Bank. This all had a really devastating effect on the Greek economy and the people. So perhaps one of the most troubling things was how the bailouts were used. A shocking 95% of the money went to repay mainly German and French banks, with a mere 5% actually benefiting Greek citizens. I just want to say that again. A shocking 95% of the money that was loaned went to repay German banks and French banks, with only 5% benefiting Greek citizens. This approach effectively transferred the risk from private banks to European taxpayers while doing little to address the actual crisis that Greece was in. So the continuous cycle of borrowing to repay old debts trapped Greece in a perpetual state of indebtedness. Unlike the World War II era, when Germany received significant debt relief, Greece was offered limited restructuring options. They did not let them work out a payment plan or put it on layaway, or, there was nothing that was done in a diplomatic way to ease the economic burden that they were under. Consequently, its debt-to-GDP ratio skyrocketed to 179 by 2015. So you have this metric that's just going through the roof that measures how much debt they have versus how much productivity they have. The IMF's involvement further highlights the failures of Western financial institutions, as Greece became the first developed country to miss an IMF loan repayment in 2015, underscoring the severity of its financial straits and the inadequacy of prescribed solutions. So at the time, they said they didn't have the money or basically refused to pay because it would have completely bankrupted the country and it would have destroyed them. So they had to default. At its core, the Greek crisis reveals an institutional trap. Okay, the Eurozone structure, lacking mechanisms for effective crisis management and sustainable growth, left Greece totally vulnerable to economic shocks and didn't have any way for it to recover either. And this always becomes the thing, Mike. It's the IMF's controversial lending practices. Okay, they've been doing this to.
I was going to ask if like the takeaway from this is
getting
that
away with it
Greeks
for a
are
long
not white
time.
because they're now
What
getting treated like Africa from the West with the debt traps.
Yeah, it would have been harder for them to take over the government of Greece because they are European and they have whatever. There would be enough institutional wealth and structure that it wouldn't have been so easy. But I'm sure that they tried to abscond with ports and water works and whatever they can privatize and squeeze out of a country. That's what they'll take. As we just saw with the last story, they will steal cargo ships from North Korea, sell them, and use the proceeds to give people who have frivolous lawsuits claiming that they're terrorists. Such measures disproportionately affect the poorest segments of society. So when they institute their budgetary cuts, austerity measures, privatizations, cuts that lead to reduced social services and education and health budgets, it affects only poor people and working class people. I feel like a broken record because we talk about this all the time. The West wants to debt trap these countries and keep them in a cycle of poverty so that they're in a constant state of chaos and they cannot get stable enough to truly be a competitor in any stretch of the imagination, and also continue to extort and extract the resources of that country. You got to have those resources. That's really what any and all conflict is ever about. So when the IMF also it gets criticized for exerting undue influence over the borrowing countries, central banks and monetary policies. So if you're in debt, say to the IMF or one of these other institutions, they can come in and make policy decisions at your country and change the rules and pass laws and change tax codes. Anything that they can do to get their money back. Now, China doesn't have these kind of strings attached. When they give debt, now they've got a fair amount of debt floating around places, but they don't have the same structure where they say, we're going to come in and treat you like a baby and hold your hand and spank your bottom and run your pockets and make sure that you're giving us. No, China says, we want to be partners. We want to work with you, not against you. We don't want to trap you. We want to make sure that you're getting on your feet, because they might just believe in their Marxist principles and say, we're all stronger together.
Yeah, I couldn't say anything better about that. I'd love to comment on the Chinese debt trap diplomacy being a myth, but you summed it up perfectly.
Yeah, I mean, it said a lot, right? It's something that I think even mainstream journalists are starting to report on as being. I saw a Bloomberg article literally said that. Said the myth of the Chinese debt trap. It needs to go away. It's not real. It's made up. We've yet to see the same level of oppression that you see with Western loans. Again, that's us, guys, the West, being dicks. It's what we're good at. The IMF loan terms are characterized by short repayment periods, requiring recipients to state to back pay loans much quicker than other lenders might demand. So the IMF wants their money back by Friday. This can create additional financial strain on already struggling economies. Moreover, the conditionality attached to the IMF loans has been seen by those people as overly intrusive, forcing countries to radically alter their economic systems to comply with IMF requirements. So, compliance. Critics have also pointed out that the apparent double standards in IMF policies, while the fund warns rich countries against austerity during economic downturns, it often forces such measures on low-income countries on a condition for financial assistance. So they give preferential treatment to their white Western buddies, and if you're brown and from the global south, you're fucked. Also, we always discussed IMF has been accused of perpetuating debt cycles. Okay, they provide new loans to pay off older ones, trapping nations in continuous borrowing cycles. This practice, combined with limited debt relief options, make it extremely difficult for countries to escape their debt burdens. They don't work with you. I think Vijay Prashad said it best. They're like the mafia. They act like the mafia. And when you don't pay, they're going to give you a haircut. They're going to bust your legs up, and they're going to take your shoes and bang your wife. The COVID-19 pandemic also highlighted another controversial aspect of IMF lending, the leveraging crisis situations to impose conditions on relief loans. So this approach has been criticized for potentially hampering countries' ability to respond effectively to the health and economic challenges posed by the pandemic. So they said, we don't care if there's a pandemic on. Fuck you, pay me. You know? Definitely something I heard. I think I saw that in Goodfellas where he said, you had a bad week? Doesn't matter. Fuck you, pay me. So are you ready? This is the Western imperialism fun facts. You ready for this? By 1914, European colonial powers and their former colonies controlled approximately 85%.
Is that like when the sun never
surface.
set on the British Empire?
At the end of it, at the end of the British Empire, yeah, right before it started slowly breaking up around World War II. Now, the rate of new territorial acquisitions during the new imperialism period of the late 1870s to World War I was nearly triple that of the earlier 19th century, averaging about 240,000 square miles per year. In the first 75 years of the 19th century, the new territorial claims averaged about 83,000 square miles annually. The British Empire, at its peak, covered approximately 24% of the Earth's total land. By the early 20th century, the number of colonial powers had increased, with new entrants including Germany, the United States, Belgium, Italy, and Japan. The Dutch East Indies, a modern-day Indonesia, comprised roughly 3,000 islands with a population of over 100 million at the time of independence in 1949. That's pretty interesting. Fun fact. And that's when you have the dissolution of a lot of these old colonial places is right after World War II, stuff starts coming undone. And since then, we've slowly kind of tried, or at least pretended to get out of our old colonialist ways, or at least changed. The game's the same, but the name has changed. You know what I mean? European imperialism in Asia lasted for 6 centuries, formally ending with the independence of Portugal's last colony, Macau, in 1999. I hear they got casinos there. I'm not sure. In 1947, British India gained independence and was partitioned into 2 nations, India and Pakistan. How could they have ruled over such a wide land so brutally and so swiftly without any reprisal from those people there? It's just a shame. The shame how we did those people dirty. Yeah, that was really nice. Oh, and then don't forget about the Bengal famine. We're just going to be thanks for growing this grain for us, India. We're just going to take this back to Britain now. Hope that's okay. If you starve to death, 2 million people die, you'll be all right. Some people will die, but it'll be all right. The United States advocated for the annexation of Taiwan from China in the 19th century, demonstrating its imperialist ambitions in Asia. So there you go. You wonder why there's all this hubbub about Taiwan? It's because we've had our eyes set on Taiwan since the very beginning. By the aftermath of World War II, European colonies still controlled more than 1 billion people throughout the world, including large portions of the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and the Indian subcontinent. Yeah, that's pretty wild.
Please do.
So, what do you think? Should I tell you how I feel? Should I tell you how I really feel? Well, I was a little salty today. Well, fuck me sideways with a rusty spoon. If this is not the most goddamn infuriating clusterfuck of an economic imperialism masquerading as a benevolent financial assistance, I mean the West, in its infinite fucking wisdom, has managed to pull off the most spectacular con job since the invention of organized religion. Convincing the world that their predatory lending practices are somehow charitable endeavor. So let's cut through the bullshit. This isn't about helping developing nations develop, quote unquote. It's about keeping them in perpetually bent over the barrel, their asses in the air, ready to be fucked raw by the massive throbbing cock of neocolonialism. The IMF and the World Bank aren't institutions of economic salvation. They're modern-day equivalent of the East India Company minus the snazzy uniforms, plus a shitload of economic jargon to obfuscate their true purpose. Thomas Sankara, that magnificent bastard, had it right when he said debt is neocolonialism. It's the same old song and dance, just with a new rhythm. Instead of gunboats and colonial administrators, we've got suits and briefcases filled with toxic loan agreements. The goal remains the same: control, exploitation, the systematic pillaging of resources under the guise of development. And don't even get me started on those fucking structural adjustment programs. Jesus H. Christ on a bicycle. Could they be any more transparently evil? Oh, you're struggling to feed your population? Here's an idea. Why don't you slash social spending and privatize everything that isn't nailed down? That should do it. It's economic waterboarding, plain and simple. The West has the audacity to point fingers at China and their lending practices while conveniently forgetting the centuries of their own financial fuckery. It's like a serial killer that criticizes someone for jaywalking. The hypocrisy is so thick you could cut it with a fucking chainsaw. So here's the kicker. Some countries are finally waking up to this shit and telling the IMF, hey, go fuck yourself and stick those austerity measures up your wazoo. It's about goddamn time. The global financial system needs more than reform. It needs a full-blown exorcism to purge it of its colonial demons. In the end, this whole debt racket is nothing more than a sophisticated form of economic bondage, okay? It's time to call it what it is. A continuation of colonial exploitation. Dressed up in a three-piece suit, armed with a calculator instead of a musket. And until we acknowledge that, and dismantle that system, then we're all complicit in perpetuating this cycle of financial
fantastic
oppression.
I'll take this opportunity real quick to reference a Citations Needed episode, a podcast I really like. It was titled The Neoliberal Optimism Industry. And it's when I first found out about Jason Hickel, who is a great Twitter personality as well. A lot of great takes, but his work is mostly centered around neocolonialism. And he does a great job in that hour-long episode explaining exactly how the nature of neocolonialism works, how most people think that the U.S. and the West provide aid to these poor countries in the global South, but how what they actually do is extract a lot of profits, pay a small portion of those profits in taxes to the government of the Western countries that then gets an even smaller portion of that funneled off in that form of aid. So he just explains it very simply and then shows with graphs in his work how the money actually flows from the global South to the global North, and how it's an extractive relationship, and there's no factual way to deny it. You can only do it with propaganda. And he also explains the neoliberal optimism industry that's surrounded around this, like created by people like Bill Gates, who's the guy, Steven Pinker, the big hair, and they paint this rosy picture of the West sort of being like these caretakers, and it's a white saviorist, like kind of racist viewpoint when you break it down. But so yeah, Jason Hinkle has some great work on this. Just read any of his stuff. But Ben Norton, we're always referencing. He's constantly talking about the nature of imperialism and neocolonialism. So you can check out the Geopolitical Economy Report as well. But yeah, I mean, that's the true nature of it, and I think you did a great job describing exactly how that works in this concrete scenario right here.